What's up, guys? Today we're going over the Ribbontail, the second Arms Week weapon available this week, and I think this thing's a lot better than people are giving it credit for. This is going to be a strand trace rifle with some really cool rolls and a great origin trait. So in this video, we'll be going over those rolls you want on this weapon and comparing it to the Unsworn, the dungeon strand trace, because I think that is what it's fighting against for that slot. And as mentioned, this is one of two weapons you can get this week from Arms Week. And after you get your hand cannons, what I just did was focus the engram just generically into a weapon, and that can be a hand cannon or the Ribbontail trace, and they will drop at your highest tier available, so tier 3 for me. So jumping into this strand trace, looking at the perks on this weapon, starting off with the left column, there's going to be quite a few good options. So starting off, I think just the best generic perk will be Envious Arsenal, and you might be like, what? That's kind of like a DPS swap perk, and you know, traces aren't good for DPS, so what am I even talking about? Well, with Enhanced Envious Arsenal, you actually get plus 22 ammo generation stat, and the way you use trace rifles like a primary, building into ammo generation is very, very nice to spawn in more special and more heavy. So without that perk, it takes roughly 12 kills to get a special ammo brick to drop, and I get 75 back from picking it up. And if I put on that perk, it will now only take 8 or 9 kills to get a special ammo brick, making it quite faster. And then if we throw on some things like special ammo finder, a strand ammo generation perk, and finally something like a scavenger, which are cheap this season with the artifact. And finally, you could also throw on the abundant ammo mod on the trace itself to bump up the ammo generation by 10. So with all that stuff going on, it now takes 4 or 5 kills to get a full special brick, and that special brick now gives 127 with the scavenger. So you like truly have infinite ammo with the setup on this weapon. You're gonna be easily getting 4 or 5 kills with 127 ammo. So you can kind of spam this thing like crazy, or use it as a way to build your ammo back up between like damage phases in a raid. Because not only will you easily be able to maintain your ammo with this weapon, you'll be generating more ammo than you actually need and stacking it up quite quickly with this setup. Then in the left column, the second perk I think is a must get is going to be Proximity Power. I went over this once already. This is going to be an increase to your melee stat when you get final blows while surrounded. So at times 1 is going to be roughly 16 melee stat, at times 2 33, and at times 3 52. And so at 52 additional melee stat, once you're above 100, that translates to roughly 15% more melee damage, and it's supposed to be another way to get up to 200 melee without actually having to build into full melee sets. So that's going to be a very, very solid perk to use for melee builds. And the last two perks on the left I think are usable, but more specific is going to be Subsistence if you wanted to avoid reloading, but I don't think that's that important. And finally, Wellspring for ability builds. That could be a perk you could use. Then if we move on to the right column to see what we can combine those perks with, first off we have the classic Detonator Beam, and Detonator Beam takes 20 shots to proc, so without it we hit 400 damage on Carl. Now with it, on the 20th shot it will proc, and the damage will go up to 524, which is going to be an average of 31% damage increase for those 20 shots. And that is pretty high, and with this being an AoE perk, not only is that going to be good for just single target damage, it's going to be also kind of nice for ad clear. But instead, this weapon has Surrounded on it, and Surrounded is going to be a 48% increase with Enhanced, which is by far the highest damage buff on the weapon. And so it makes a lot of sense to pair Surrounded with Proximity Power, and to be honest, that is my dream god roll on the weapon, because I find myself using these strand traces for melee builds, mostly the prismatic ones, which right now there's a meta one for each character. And I like using traces like that on those builds for two reasons. One, for ad clear. Honestly, a trace rifle feels more like a primary in terms of ammo and the uptime on using it. And in those builds, I run Bravery to get unraveling rounds going to help with ad clear. And with the unraveling rounds, and it obviously being a darkness weapon, that helps build up the other side of Transcendence on those builds. So I think that's the first role I want, Proximity Power plus Surrounded. And the cool thing about that role is you can actually get it guaranteed from rank 10 in the event and get a hollow foil version of that exact role. Then the second most important role is going to be Detonator Beam, and I think with that, you just want to pair it with Envious Arsenal for that ammo generation. And a few other roles that are maybe worth keeping if you get them along the way is going to be Subsistence or Wellspring plus Killing Tally, or even Binary Orbit. I think they're pretty similar. Killing Tally is going to be more if you're actively using the weapon, which for a trace, I think that is going to be the way you usually use it. And Binary Orbit will be more so if you're using more like a regular special, where you're just point out for the high health targets and still using your primary as like your main at clear weapon. But now moving on to comparing it to the Unsworn, is it even better than the Dungeon Trace? Well, honestly, I think it comes down to mostly the origin trait as like the true one-to-one comparison. So the Unsworn has Subjugation, where to weak targets, the shots will explode, and to stronger targets, it will then exhaust them. While with the Ribbontail, we have Tenacity, where when we get final blows, it will grant weapon damage, reload, and handling. So first with the Unsworn, every 4 bullets with the Trace will cause an explosion, hitting for 14. And that's going to be an 8.5% net increase of damage on the weapon. But then when you go over to champions, mini bosses, and bosses, it now exhausts them. So you don't get that 8.5% increase. That's only on minors and majors. While compared with the Ribbontail is going to be a 10% buff at times 20 with Tenacity. So we got to get 20 kills to ramp up to times 20. But that 10% is going to work for everything in the game. Minor, major, champion, mini boss, and bosses. And not only is it a 10% damage increase, it's going to max out your reload speed and your handling, which is obviously very, very nice. So one-to-one origin traits, I think it's fair to say at minimum they're equal. But I think Tenacity obviously has a higher potential. And given the fact that it works for all enemy types in terms of the damage increase, even though you have to ramp it up to times 20 to get to 10%, even at like 5-10 stacks, you're already doing more damage than the Unsworn, because the Unsworn doesn't work versus bosses and champions and things like that. So in my opinion, I think Tenacity gets the win, but it is pretty close, and Subjugation is obviously a great origin trait. And not only that, but I think Ribbontail is just way more versatile in terms of its roles. The Unsworn is basically just a Trace with Detonator Beam on it, while the Ribbontail I think has an excellent combo for melee builds, the Proximity plus Surrounded, and then I think it also has a better left column perk to pair with Detonator Beam, being Envious Ursula, all about generating ammo. So in my opinion, I don't think it's really even close. I think Ribbontail is just straight up better and 100% worth getting. Anyways, let me know what role you want on this thing down below. Like usual, thanks for watching. Catch you guys next time.